Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project. This is their August 2022 series, and my name is Michelle Dingle. I am the moderator for this evening's conversation, and thank you for joining us. Middle Passage Ceremonies and Port Markers Project began its work remembering ancestors 11 years ago. And this year, our sessions will focus on memory work through art. And I am so excited about this series. I consider myself a creative, so expression through all kinds of artistry, whether it be painting, dance, music, all of that speaks to me. And I am looking forward to seeing how art ties into the African-American experience. We have two artists today with us, Miss Rhonda Bristol and Dr. Jolie Rocke. For most of her life, Miss Rhonda Bristol has been expressing herself through art, creating art in several forms to include painting, sculpture, printing, and objects of personal adornment. In addition, Rhonda has taught and continues to mentor young artists. She has lived as an artist in many places and held many jobs. And in her words, she has been at this for a while and happily at it. She is proud of her identity and considers it a privilege to be Black, educated, artistically talented, and still active. And even now, she has much more to explore and produce. Ms. Bristol welcomes people who can and will stand on her shoulders. Now, Dr. Rocke is a renowned soprano who has performed as a featured soloist in the US, Europe, and Australia. She is a versatile vocalist of varied repertoire, including but not limited to opera, jazz, gospel, and my personal favorite, musical theater. We'll get into that later for sure. Dr. Rocke's passion for music and the desire to pass it on to her students leads her to produce concerts, direct community art programs, and train aspiring singers as a private voice teacher, coach, and mentor. She currently resides in Houston, Texas. She is an adjunct instructor of voice at San Jacinto College, and she's the owner of Rocke Vocal Studio. As a 2020 to 2024 Texas Commission on the Arts touring roster artist, Dr. Rocke performs, presents master classes and lectures focusing on the accomplishments of African-American music and musicians. She also serves as the director of music at First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. So please welcome both of them to today's panel discussion. Now, this is going to be a jammed-packed conversation with two powerhouses. So I hope that you're all as excited as I am to begin. And this is how it's going to go this evening. I'm going to have some conversation with each artist, and you will get to present samples of their work. We will then open it up for Q&A. Now, feel free to use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask your questions throughout, but we will hold on to those questions until we get to the Q&A piece. Now, with that said, let's get started. Rhonda, I'm going to start with you first. My first question for you is, what inspired or triggered your art?
I started art while I was still a child and went to the Museum of Modern Art School for Children, and then went to a high school that was dedicated to music and art, and then went on to college and did the same thing. So I can only say that I got inspired when I actually was in my undergraduate years, and I was substituting and working with children with emotional blocks toward learning. And it was very different for me. And that was one of the best things that could have happened to me. That was in my junior year. So by the time I got in my senior year, then I was actually teaching, not substituting, student teaching, and had children that weren't used to seeing somebody with Black skin. That was in Massachusetts. And I had to deal with racism, which most of us do deal with. And I had to deal with the energy of teenagers. Art is wonderful. You can't start with clay first. You're asking for trouble unless you really know your students. My goal was in all those years until now, and probably beyond today, is to make people feel good in their skin, to make them realize that they have talents that they have not tapped, and they have to be willing to make a mistake, because otherwise you never learn.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a little bit about how you began. Do you want to go into a little more detail about how it all began? And then can you talk to me about how that evolved throughout the years?
You mean from when I was a child?
Yeah, why not? Is that where it began for you?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
let's talk about that.
I remember in 6th grade, I was drawing things, and my parents were taking my brother and I to a picnic, and I was in the back of the car drawing tombstones and having a wonderful time. And when someone else saw it in the family, and they said, was she going to a funeral? You know, why is she doing that? I do not know why I did that. But at the time, that seemed to be the thing to do. I think children nowadays are more like I was then. They kind of just gravitate to what they want to do, and there doesn't appear to be rhyme or reason. But the actuality was that from my 6th grade education through middle school, we called it junior high then, through high school, through undergrad, through graduate school, it has always been art. As a child, I studied music, so Dr. Julie would like to hear that. And I played piano well. I found with art, I didn't have to do scales, and I didn't have to practice.
You didn't like practice?
Yeah. And when we got to theory, well, let me say that I have a hearing disorder. So it was very hard for me to tell what was higher, what was lower. I was really upset with that. So art became my mainstay, and art still is.
So you started off with tombstones, right?
I certainly did. And then I went to religious things.
You did what?
Went to religious things.
Okay.
Pictures of saints and angels and stuff like that, because that was pleasing to the adults.
Okay. And do you feel like it's still evolving now?
Yes, and I hope it still does.
Okay, that's great.
Because if you get to a certain level, you keep doing the same thing in different colors, different sizes. That's, you know, with technology now, you don't even have to be in the equation. So why do that?
Yeah, true. So tell me, how does your art reflect the African-American experience?
Well, like so many of us, I have studied my history, researched some of my ancestors, been to the motherland, been to the Caribbean, have Caribbean relatives, taught in places where there were sometimes a lot of African-American people, and in some places where there were very few. I taught at a college in Vermont, and I was a rarity.
Mm-hmm.
There's another stories to go with that, but I'd rather talk about the art. I like drawing people who I look like. I like painting people that I look like. When I first started teaching, I was teaching in Mineola, New York at a junior high. And on weekends, I would go into the village, and I would be one of those people standing on the street drawing a portrait with charcoal or pastels or something. I learned there not to take offense when someone said, oh, my kid can do better than that. Why are you here? And I said, I'm here because I'm good and I want to be better. That's me.
So you mentioned being in Vermont, there weren't many people that looked like you, but you like to do art that resembles you, right? And so we're talking about that African-American experience. Where did you draw that from if you didn't see that every day?
Well, I only taught at that college for a couple of years.
Okay.
I worked my way down the Eastern Seaboard.
Okay. So you traveled a lot, you got to see the shades of browns and blacks. And I take it that also helped to inspire the art that you made then and continue to make today.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I know that you've got a few slides of the art that you've done, and you're sitting behind some of your artwork now, which is absolutely fabulous. So for those who are on this Facebook Live, look at the work behind, because that is some of the works of Miss Rhonda Bristol right there. But we also have some pictures that we'd like to show. And then Rhonda, feel free to talk about the images that we're about to show and talk about what those inspirations were, or what you were thinking that day when you decided to create that beautiful piece of art. So we're going to talk to those pictures now.
Okay. I love sculpture. I love working with my hands. And I was resonating with the knowledge that art and memory work together. When I was in Africa, I saw people who were very comfortable not dressed like a Westerner. And it was interesting, even though I didn't speak the language, to understand by the emotion, the senses that I got, the willingness for people to connect. And in my art, I try to do the same things. I try to show expression. I try to show the possibilities that maybe at some point in time, we will be able to communicate with each other, as we always have, using art and symbols and music and dance. We're all in this together. These are pieces that I have in my home. I have pieces around my property, in my garden, in my backyard. I have things hanging on my wall on the back of my house. This is a representative of a mask that I made using the raku process. And I was trying to show the person getting ready to speak and being a bit hesitant in whether or not they should actually try to engage. We can show these a little bit faster, please. This is a piece that I call Hair Joy. And as a child, it took me a long time to appreciate my hair joy. I didn't like it. I grew up in a community where we were the family of color, and my hair was pressed, so that when it rained, I was in a dilemma if I didn't have an umbrella, and had to rush home during lunch and try to patch myself up. Once I got to high school, it was better. You know, I always carried an umbrella, so you have to be safe. A young woman, I'm trying to show the energy, yet she looks so composed and she looks like she has it all together. But if you have teenagers, or if you have younger people who are nowhere near my age, you know that sometimes the exterior is just a facade and there's a lot going on underneath. I've had some work down in South Africa. And at the time, husband of mine, guy with the black jacket on, was in South Africa with Nelson Mandela. And I'm showing the image of them, but I'm also showing an ancestor who is trying to get someone's attention, trying to convey some feelings. South Africa has had a rough road. America has a rough road still, and started with a rough road. Here we are looking at a present day experience with someone with a violin. That someone is a child of mine who is now an adult. And in the background would be her great great aunt and her great great uncle. And in the front, you will see a representative of an ancestor who is trying to bring all these worlds together. This one is, I'm happy with my ancestors, and I'm very comfortable with them, and they're all around me, and their symbolism, and even in COVID, I'm cool. A beautiful woman, another doctor, works with college students. Here I've included some Adinkra symbols with an expression of a woman who is beautiful, another daughter, my firstborn, who is creating this wonderful energy that everybody would like to be around. You just feel like you're going to be hugged. I like to do things that are spacious, where time does not matter. Skin color really does not matter or should not. And the fact that we can communicate and express joy and love and cry together is very important.
Those were all amazing. I was just sitting there, just going through the slides saying, oh, I like this one. Oh, I like this one too. Oh, I like this
You
one.
gotta stop because I gotta get through the door. My head cannot do this. It's gotta stay this size.
You are all so amazing. Thank you for sharing those visuals for us. And like I said, just the ones that I see behind you are also just as amazing. I can imagine what your home looks like, both on the outside and on the inside, with all of the art surrounding you.
My home is a gallery.
Oh, I can imagine. Look, I kind of grew up in a house that looked like a gallery too.
Then you know, then you're comfortable. But I don't have dogs with tails.
With everything around and being visually stimulated at every turn. So I can imagine that that's what your house looks like as well. I have another question for you. Do you have something that you consider to be the highlight of your work so far? Or is it just kind of been more like just a progression of greatness, so to speak?
Well, I think the highlight would have been when I had my work at the Nelson Mandela Fine Arts Museum in South Africa.
Talk to me a little bit about that.
Unfortunately, because of COVID, we weren't able to go, but we had troubles getting permission. I'm not quite sure how it all went because I was not intrinsically involved with it, but the art finally got there. Consequently, it was there longer than it should have been. I am happy that I got it back. I am happy that I got to meet some African-American artists and African artists from South Africa who had a show at the museum, the Ritz Museum in Jacksonville, Florida. So that has been my highlight. There have been other things, awards and all that stuff, but meeting people who also love what you love is very gratifying. And being a senior and not being treated as though I did not know a thing in my head, and I have so far not lost everything that's in my head, that I plan to try to do as much sharing as I can so that people can stand on my shoulders.
Well, I mean, in your own words, you said that you were just happy to still be talented and still active. So
yes,
keep going. Keep it going. As long as it's in there, keep it going, right?
right.
What do you think has been the impact of your art? Who do you think you've touched or have influenced because of your art?
This sounds really conceited, but
Speak your truth.
I've influenced every student I've taught. I made it my business to know them. In fact, I worked as a track coach after school so that I could get to people who felt they were above it all.
Wow.
They didn't need it. So I'm very versatile.
That's
And you do what you have to do to make people realize that they have an opportunity, people who look like me. You can't be upset when you don't try.
Yeah.
So my job was not to just bring home a check every 2 weeks. My job was to instill the knowledge that they could do what I could do, but they can do it better.
And tell me, of your students, have you seen some amazing things that have come from them as an artist?
Yes.
Because of your mentorship?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Tell me about, like, are they young? Are they older? I mean,
everybody's younger than I am. That's number one, right? Then, as students, yes.
Yes.
Working with a group who were, I would say, slightly beyond childbearing age or slightly at childbearing age. I have taught from from kindergarten up through college, university. And it has always taught me something. You can give, but you always get back.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of mentorship that
it's wonderful.
Doesn't get overlooked per se, but we don't really talk about it so much. I used to be a mentor too, and there's a lot of giving, but then you get so much back. You're learning from them just as much as they're learning from you, right?
Exactly.
I think say that. So tell me, what's next for you? I mean, you're still active. You're still going.
Well, 2 years ago, I moved from the Keys up to Orlando. And I have just finished converting what was a 2-car garage into my workspace. I can't call it a studio because it's still a little tacky. But at least I have horizontal spaces where I haven't got I have no junk on it. So you can look around and you don't feel frizzled because there's so much going on that you have to leave. And that's how it was when I first moved in and did the house first, then took a break, and then had to tackle the garage, which by that time became a junk shop again. Anything you didn't know what to do with, you threw out there. The car has never been in the garage. What I did to make it nice, I put patio doors on the outside of my garage door. So I have security. And then when I want the daylight, I raise the garage door and I have all this light and all this space, because normally I was on a small little, card table. And now I have 4 different areas that I can paint on, including the easel. So I am very happy. And then I have my kiln and I finally have it installed. And I have a hoist, so I do not have to strain myself lifting and lowering the hood. So I can do my clay. When I was in the Keys, when we had Irma, my house was on the ground. I lost a lot of stuff. I lost my kiln. I won't tell you all the things I lost.
Yeah.
Now I have a new one and I am very, very happy.
Well, that is awesome. And I will say there's a lot of people that can't fit their cars in their garage, but I'm sure that the stuff that's keeping your car out is probably a lot more beautiful than the stuff that's in other people's garages that's keeping their cars out. So keep up the good work with that. I am going to get ready to shift gears. Thank you so much, Ms. Rhonda. We will come back to you in the Q&A because I'm sure there's a lot of people that have questions. And for those that have questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A, but we will get to them a little bit later. I'm going to shift my gears and I'm going to go to Dr. Jolie. And I'm going to ask you some of these same questions because you have some different artistic things that you're working on. So, Miss Jolie.
Hello, everyone. Thank
you.
Are you? I'm fantastic. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm so glad that you could come. Dr. Jolie, what inspired you with your art? I mean, you do so much, a lot of it around music. So we just talked about art and sculpture. Now we're getting into the music side of things. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I would say my first inspiration was my mother. She used to sing to me when I was a young child, and I can still remember the feel of being in her lap and listening to her sing lullabies and other children's songs. And so when I was about 3 years old, she came into the living room and found me in the corner singing to the corner. So I was facing this corner and I would do it, quite a bit. And I was listening to my voice bouncing off of the walls and flying all around the house and up the stairs and, trying, I guess, to be a ventriloquist and not really knowing it. I think I was just enjoying listening to my voice. And I was blessed because she didn't shoo me out of the corner and think that something was wrong with me. She actually stood there and watched for a little while, and then she realized that I could hear my voice, traveling in the echo bouncing around the room. So she allowed me to do it, thank God.
Do you think she allowed you to do it because she was musically inclined as well, and she kind of picked up on like, oh, she's doing some stuff that I might recognize? Or do you allowed you the freedom to just be who you were?
I think she just allowed me the freedom to be who I was. And she tries to still do that because she's still with us, thank God. Yeah. And now I still like hearing my voice bounce around rooms, just bigger ones like theaters and churches.
The acoustics has got to be better than a corner, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. So outside of like starting to listen to your voice and the reverb that comes from that, like, where did you begin and how did that evolve as you continue to dive deeper and deeper into your talent?
Okay, so after my mom saw me in the corner, and so I kept going back. She invited a friend who lived across the street, Richard Gilliard, and he was in a band. It was the early 70s, and he was in a band and that was traveling all over the world. They had cut a couple of 45s. And if people know what 45s are.
I
so
she says she knows too.
Yeah. So she had him come over and teach me a song. So at the time, he decided to teach me, if I had a hammer, I'd hammer in the morning, I'd hammer in the evening, all over this land. And so I, at 3 years old, sang that over and over at everybody's house. And, in addition to all the lullabies that my mom sang to me. And matter of fact, one of them I sang, at least one of them I sang to my kids. And a lot of people don't know it. It's choo, choo, whistle and blow, pull down the lever and merrily go down the valley, up the hill, ding dong, choo, choo, home. And so, I just would sing. I would go to visit the little ladies around the neighborhood that were home and would bake cookies, and I would go over for tea because I was precocious, and I would knock on the door because I liked cookies and I liked tea, and I would tea and cookie with the ladies at 2, 3, 4 years old. And so in return for my cookies and tea, I would share a song.
Wow.
And so that's how I started. Then when I was in 4th grade, I auditioned for the choir, and I was told I was tone deaf and I would never be in the choir. Yes. And thank God my mother allowed me to be who I was, and we had a discussion about it, and she said, just keep singing. And by the time I was in 6th grade, I was a soloist for the 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade assemblies and the choirs, and a featured artist, in junior high school in New York. And my junior high school was pretty popular. A lot of our students went on to music and art. And some became, pretty famous singers and rap artists and so forth. So we had a great music ed program. So I went on and auditioned to music and art, got into music and art, became one of the soloists at music and art in New York, the Fame School, graduated, went on to the Hart School in Connecticut at the University of Hartford, and taught in Hartford Public Schools for 9 years. And a friend called and asked me to perform for his version of God's Trombones by James Weldon Johnson. And from there, I auditioned for Connecticut Opera. And then my life started moving more towards performance. But I've never given up my teaching because I love teaching. And so it's always trying to find the balance between performing and teaching.
Got you. All right, so I'm going to go back to that African-American experience because this is kind of why we're all here, right?
Okay.
How does your art reflect that African-American experience? And we kind of talked a little bit offline about this before we actually got started, but I want everyone to kind of know some of the things that you were telling me about this.
Okay. Well, my performances, first off, and productions that I create for myself and I tour around with are mainly centered in African American history and music, the study of spirituals, Negro spirituals in particular, and then also looking at the life of Black female performers mostly. Though right now I am doing a big project in Missouri, in the Columbia, Warrensburg, and Jefferson City area, where we're studying and researching the work of John William Blind Boone, who was a performing pianist from 1879, and he died in 1927. So he had a 48-year career of a professional career performing, but he always traveled with, as part of the Boone Concert Company, a female soprano. Usually a soprano. He had one mezzo that I could find. And so we're doing a symposium of his work in Columbia, Warrensburg, and Jefferson City with 3 universities in September 30th, October 1st, and October 2nd. I've also been in Columbia doing performances with the Odyssey Chamber Music Series. We're doing our 4th iteration of a performance series over 4 years called Evolution of the Negro Spiritual. And so, I have that. I've written performances called Singing Her Story, which is about 14 African-American females from the 1850s and 60s going into the 1970s. I actually perform at least one song that each of them was famous for singing, and give their life story within an hour with costume changes. It's a big show for me. And
that sounds amazing.
And then I have a show, Sing Langston, where I do the works of Langston Hughes set to song by various composers, mainly African-American composers. I have another show called Songs of the African-American Soul, that is about African-American composers and their work and how they collaborated with writers, literary artists, and how they lived their lives. A lot of times we don't talk about the composers and what their lives were like. Were they married? Did they have children? Did they make money? Were they successful? Did they do other jobs? So those things that I've always questioned as an artist, trying to, earn a living as a full-time musician and educator, I thought other people would be interested. And every time I do one of my shows, people are very interested. Last year, I debuted my first play that was inspired by my breast cancer journey. It's called Triumphant Over Triple Negative. And I got a grant to write it and to perform, to have other people perform it, which was a little strange for me to not actually perform something that I put together. But it was absolutely thrilling to see people put my words and to tell my story, and I wasn't on the stage. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of work.
And I believe we have a video, right, from you. I think we can go ahead and show that video right now. Yeah.
Features 14 inspirational women. For more than 150 years, Black female musicians created a soundtrack for civil rights. These pioneering women constructed career paths that fed them financially and artistically as they enriched this nation and the world. Her story changed history from slavery toward freedom through opera, ballads, spirituals, gospel, musicals, blues, classical, jazz, and rhythm and blues. Today, we celebrate the African American female performance tradition and its impact on the continuous fight for freedom and equality. Dr. Jolie Rocke honors her African ancestry by sharing a range of artistic expressions through her work as a professional vocalist of diverse genres, operatic artist, ensemble member, and as a soprano for several Houston-based choirs. She is an adjunct professor of voice at San Jacinto College and serves nationally as a private vocal instructor, coach, and mentor. Dr. Rocke has also served as a clinician, lecturer, panelist, and ministers through song at several churches. Her love of the arts inspires her to present emerging artists from a variety of arts disciplines to new audiences. Dr. Rocke is an independent recording artist with 3 CD projects available through her website, iTunes, and other media outlets.
Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely? Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away.
A writer and producer of several works, the Texas Commission on the Arts touring roster artist is dedicated to researching and sharing the works and history of progenitors of the African American artistic heritage. Remembering Juneteenth. Discover a history of emancipation through documented stories and melodies of formerly enslaved Americans. When my oldest brother heard we were free, he gave a whoop, ran and jumped a high fence and told Mammy,
"Goodbye."
"Run, sinner, run, run, sinner, run, oh, run, sinner, run."
I know the other one is not like this.
It's time for a new kind of freedom. Take my breastplate, sword in hand. God's gonna build up Zion's walls. March out boldly through the land. God's gonna build up Zion's walls.
Singing her story.
Oh, thank you so much for that. That was amazing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question for you because now that I've seen that beautiful video, I want to know, why do you think it's so important to tell our story, that African American story? It seems super embedded into what you do every day. So tell me, why do you think it's so important to tell that story?
When I'm performing, I endeavor to channel the spirits of my ancestors when I take the stage. For far too long, we've suffered from oppressive acts. There has been too much victimization and brutality toward Black, Indigenous people of color. Racism and its destructive and divisive mental conditioning must end. Music helps heal the wounds of the soul and gives me hope for a brighter future. So I'm very passionate about my music, whatever I sing, even if it's opera arias and art songs by European masters or African American masters and American masters. I love music. I also don't want our history and our heritage to be lost. I want my children and the young people around me to continue to sing spirituals into years and generations. I want hymns to continue into generations, because the stories that are told and shared are so critical and were critical and are critical to my life and my livelihood that I can't ignore what happened in the past. Understanding my history and understanding how, one of the things that I'm trying to put out in my work is not the sadness and the oppressiveness, but how we overcame the triumphs, how Marian Anderson in 1938 recorded in her IRS statement that she had earned $238,000. That's the equivalent of $4.4 million. How many people know we had millionaires and billionaires, the equivalent of that in the 1920s and 30s? Tulsa. People need to talk about Tulsa being burnt down, the Black Wall Street. We need to know these stories to give hope. So often, stories about our history and our music are told, and they never talk about where we came from. How did we learn this music? How did we grow? Why, and so that's, to me, important, so that the next generation is motivated and know that they can succeed because they stand on the shoulders of other people who were successful. Black people didn't just become successful in 1900 and on. This has been happening for many hundreds of years.
And that's a great segue because, again, I told you I was a musical theater buff, and you kind of schooled me a little bit earlier about how we were involved in things way before anyone knew that we were involved in it, right? So can you just touch base? We only have a couple of more minutes to go into Q&A. Talk to me about some of the first musicals and how they Black folks doing that, right?
The Higher Sisters were from Sacramento, California. They they made their operatic recital debut in 1867 in Sacramento, April of 1867. They went on to form a troupe with their father, and they hired other artists to perform with them and travel around North America. And they they wrote their own musical theater productions and toured them. So some of them were in 1876, Out of Bondage, Colored Aristocracy in 1877, Yorlina, the African Princess, Uncle Tom's Cabin, The Underground Railroad, The Gold Bug. These were all in the late 1800s. And then they continued up through 1909 with The Red Moon. So they had at least 15 productions that they performed and toured with. Then you have I have to mention the Fifth Jubilee Singers. They did perform a couple of oratorios, but they also, helped get the Negro spiritual to be known across the world. That was in 1870, 71, 72 when they did their first tours, right? And raised $150,000 to build Jubilee Hall. Then we have, Higher is Hyer. Then we have other performers that come in the 1920s. In the 1920s and 1930s, it was the heyday of Black musical theater on Broadway and touring across the world. Not just with Shuffle Along, but Put in Take, Strut Miss Lissy, Liza, Oh Joy. I have a list that I wish I could share my screen because I have the list. If you want to let me share the screen, I can show the list. But the heyday was in the 20s and 30s. Things slowed down after World War II hit and Broadway closed. Then we have a resurgence in the 1950s and through the 70s and 60s and 70s when we have Bubbling Brown Sugar, Your Arms Too Short, The Believers, Tambourines to Glory. And then we go in, further into Dreamgirls in the 80s and Serafina. And there's so many productions that were written and performed by African Americans that we don't even know about.
Exactly. All right, one last question really quick, and then we've got to get into Q&A. What's next for you?
What's next? So I have the symposium coming up and some concerts in Columbia and here in Houston. I'm writing a memoir. I'm editing some of my productions. I'm making October 28th or 29th. The last Saturday in October, we're doing, I'm reprising Triumphant Over Triple Negative at the Harris County Cultural Arts Center in northeast side of Houston. And I am still teaching private voice lessons and teaching at San Jacinto and directing music and creating art series and workshops and loving what I do, mentoring young people. My greatest accomplishment is not really necessarily what I do, but actually seeing the young people that I work with and mentor. I have seen so many of them go on to careers in music, and they are thriving, doing phenomenal all over across the world. And that there's no, there's no, I can't be prouder of them. I mean, they're like my children. I still have students that I've had my first year of teaching in 1989 that still stay in contact with me. And I mean, that's just a blessing.
I think you and Miss Rhonda have that same sentiment, to be able to mentor people and to see them flourish into something that they enjoy and love. It's got to be amazing. Thank you so much for both of you. Thank you so much for the reflections of your art. I'm like totally amazed at the creativity that you all both exude, and it shows up so wonderfully in your work. We're now going to shift gears again. We're about to open this up for some questions, and I believe that I've seen some questions already in the Q&A function, in the Q&A piece, but please go into Q&A if you still have any other questions. Submit your questions. There's a button that you can click to start asking. And then between Dr. Jolie and Ms. Rhonda, hopefully you can answer all of these questions that are coming through. Let's go to the first question that I see. We've got a few already. One is from Mr. William Hamilton. It says, does an artist have to be feisty like you seem to be? I directed to, but both of you all are feisty, so I guess you're getting both.
I would say it helps.
Yeah. And I would agree. People don't have to be feisty, but you do. I had Willie Anthony Waters, the conductor, said to me, perseverance is 90%. Mm-hmm. Perseverance. So if you're not feisty, you do have to persevere. Every time somebody tells you no, you have to look for 20 yeses. Okay. So you have to just, everybody is not going to like what you do, and that's okay. But at some point, you realize that enough people like it, and you like it, so you continue. Right.
And by the way, did you ever see the same lady that told you were tone deaf after you accomplished?
No, but I will say this. Her name was Miss Myers.
Woo!
She was a choir director at PS 134 in Queens, New York. And I will tell you that the scars that some teachers place on young people that stop them in their tracks is horrendous. I'm not going to say she was a bad teacher, but sometimes we don't think about how we impact other people's lives with the things that we say. One of the best things that a dear friend, Dr. Stephen Ray Jr., gave to me when I got my teaching license, my very first year at graduation, he gave me a button that says, when you teach, you touch a life forever. And at that moment, I still have that pen. I never forgot it. And every time I open my mouth, I think about that button.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rhonda, do you have anything to add to that question about being feisty?
I always smiled. I was always polite, but I was emphatic. I'm short. Short people have a long road to hoe.
I'm there with you.
And by the way, I graduated music and art too.
That's awesome. All right, I've got another question from a Joseph Jenkins. How can her artwork be purchased?
I will be upgrading my website shortly, and I will be able then.
And what's your website name?
You
have that yet? Because
I do have it, but I don't want people going until I revamp it.
Okay.
But it's www.rhondabristolart.com.
All right. We have another question from Leslie Leggett. Rhonda, can you speak about your experience in teaching art to people in the prison system?
Oh my goodness, another great experience. When you're in prison, you have time to think and time to evaluate what you want to do with whatever part of your life you'll have left to work with. we have that same ability when we're not really trapped, but we don't take advantage of it because we've got TV and it might go all day and half the night, or we've got something else. But when you're in prison, you have some books that are passed around. You might have the opportunity to have a library that you have access to, and you can truly learn yourself. And then once you learn yourself and what you need, you're able to help others if you choose, instead of assuming you have all the answers and you're going to tell someone else what they should do and you don't do it yourself. I taught in prison in the Washington, D.C. jail system, but it was located in Virginia for 3 years. I enjoyed it. I was frightened several times. I did not have a gun. I was not really professional, other than the fact that I had educational degrees, but I had box cutters, I had X-Acto knives, all contraband. At that point, I was 5'2". I'm shorter now because I'm shrinking, right? Mm-hmm. And all I had was my mouth and my confidence in myself. And they were these guys who, well, I mean, I can run fast, but I can't outrun them. My legs are shorter, right? But I gave art shows, which meant I brought in supplies, I paid for it, I gave the material, I arranged the locale, I put up the artwork, I invited people to come and see at the opening, I took the money, I put it in their account at the prison. And after a while, it became really hard because, unfortunately, prison is an industry, it's a moneymaker. And I was hired because they thought I was dumb and I'd just take the check and go home. That's not what I did. Yeah. I even brought my younger daughter because those men were fathers and they did not know how to parent.
Yeah, well, good for you. Good for you. Moving on to the next question from Dr. Rocke. I would love to hear more about the duet performance at the end of your video. So powerful.
Thank you. So I wrote Remembering Juneteenth using it's sometimes I don't want to say that I wrote it because all of the text or the majority of the text is actually firsthand narratives from formerly enslaved people of Texas. And so I took their narratives and interfused them with spirituals to create a piece that's performed by a male and female. And they basically tell the story in 30 to 35 minutes of Juneteenth. And then we do a question and answer period after where we talk about how formerly enslaved people they escaped to freedom, not just to the Northeast, but also to Mexico and to California, and created free lands in Texas. There's a Freedmen's Bureau where they have, his history of all the different free freedmen towns in Texas. And so, yeah, it's a great way to tell the story of Juneteenth, especially to young people, but I have a lot of people who are even elderly that just don't know the story, even here in Texas. It's amazing.
Yeah. All right. We've got a few more questions in here. Hopefully I can get to a few more before we wrap this up, but this one can go to both of you all, I think. The question comes from a Patricia Smith. How does an artist know their work is marketable or saleable? Who should critique their work before exhibiting it? Quickly, who can answer that question?
I would say that I don't think you have to have someone critique it. I think you know. Now, what is key is finding the location and then doing the advertising yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right.
I agree. It's who's your audience. Who's the right audience? What is your brand? And who's the right audience? And once you get that, there's so much room in this world for artists of all disciplines. Competition is really no such thing as competition. You only compete to be better than your last best.
Absolutely.
All right, we have a question from Dorothy Israel. In all of your fantastic research, have you been able to reach back to the Fort Osage, which was the first Black settlement in America, and learn of the role women played in the development of Fort Mose? Enslaved women traveled from South Carolina to St. Augustine to gain freedom.
I did not know. I wrote it down, and I'm going to do some research on that because my great grandmother was from outside of Charleston, South Carolina, in Mount Pleasant, and so I have some ancestry there, and that would be I'm very interested in that. So there's always so much to learn.
All right, I've got one comment and one more question, so I'm going to squeeze these in before we kind of wrap things up. The comment came from an anonymous attendee. It said, "Dear Rhonda, I wish you had been my teacher. I'd love that." That says Jean Cha in Middleton, Connecticut. That's one comment. And then the question to Rhonda from Joan Holbert Hubert. Rhonda, your art is beautiful. Can you speak about the symbolism in your paintings and why do the hands cover the face in one painting? If you can say that in about 1 minute, that would be great.
The ancestor is trying to find a way to speak to someone who does not want to listen. You know how we get hunches. We have mother wit. Sometimes we don't take advantage of it.
All right. So Miss Rhonda and Dr. Jolie, thank you for sharing your extraordinary talents, your insights and examples of your work. We've all gained a better understanding of how you incorporate the experiences, the contributions, and the influence of African ancestors and their descendants into your artistic expression. Middle Passage Ceremonies and Fort Markers Project also thanks all of you all who have joined today. I know that there are probably still some questions out there that people didn't get a chance to put into the Q&A piece. If we didn't get to a question, or if you have additional questions, or if you just have some information that you'd like regarding Ms. Rhonda or Dr. Jolie, please contact the Middle Passage Ceremonies and Fort Markers Project at middlepassagemakers@gmail.com, and your questions will be answered then. Thank you to the board. And thanks again to all who donated and volunteered. Your donations and your time are the reasons why we can do these programs. Again, thanks to Nick Huster for his expertise in putting this program together. There's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, and Nick is kind of like our glue. Again, my name is Michelle Dingle. I hope that you enjoyed the conversations today, and I hope that you come back next week for the next installment of this series. Next Tuesday, August 23rd at 7 p.m., we will have John Sims, who will bring his expertise on visual arts. And we will also have Karen Davis-Jones, who will discuss dance and the African-American experience. To support the research, promotion, and sharing of the history of our transatlantic ancestors, there are a few ways that you can donate. Number one, you can donate through PayPal or Network for Good, and both of those links are on our website, middlepassageproject.org. You can mail your donations to Middle Passage Ceremonies and Fort Markers Project. Their address is P.O. Box 3071, and that's in Jacksonville, Florida, 32206. And for those who like to shop Amazon like I do, you can also donate through the Amazon Smile Foundation. Amazon Smile is a program that donates a percentage of your eligible Amazon purchases to a charity of your choice. So all you have to do is go to amazon.smile.com, link up Middle Passage Ceremonies and Fort Markers Project as your charity, and then just start shopping. Dr. Jolie, Ms. Rhonda, 30 seconds. Any last words before we send an invite everyone off for their evening? 30
Thank you, and make the best of your life.
Thank you so much for being here, and continue to inspire others around you, and feel the arts and share the arts.
Be the arts.
Thank you both again. This was amazing. Everyone, please have a great evening.